Welcome, everybody, to the first issue of the South Dakota Forest Health Workshop of 2026. We're excited to have you here. We have been chatting about the weather a little bit before the meeting here, just the wind on the west side, the blizzard conditions on the east side of the state, and seemingly nothing consistent this winter. But we want to make heads and tails of what's going on. So we thought it best to start the year with a recap of 2025, what we saw in our region in South Dakota with trees and the weather, and then go into some predictions, what we might expect, how the trees to respond come 2026. This workshop is being recorded. This recording goes on our YouTube playlist on the internet for more learning down the road. Please feel free to check out that playlist. I'll make sure to put the link in our chat box for you to catch up on previous year's workshops. We have about 25 of our past 40 workshops on the website there. If you do have questions as today's workshop comes up, progresses, please put those questions in the chat box. We'll have some time towards the end to go through as many questions as possible. We understand you all have busy schedules, as do we, and so we try to keep this to 1 hour, but we make sure we have time for questions and discussion at the end of Dr. Ball's presentation. For those of you who are certified foresters through the Society of American Forestry, please put your credentials in the chat box as we have done in the past. If you are an ISA certified arborist, we have some news for you. We've changed, not we, but the ISA has changed how they have accepted CEU reporting now, and we can no longer individually self-report. So in the past, we've received a code from Dr. Ball on his last slide, and then it was your responsibility to go on the website and submit that post approval. Well, now we're going to change it similar to what the SAF foresters are doing. If you are an ISA certified arborist seeking that one CEU for attending this live workshop, please put your name, your email address, and your certified arborist number, those three credentials in the chat box, and I'll take those and make sure they get to Dr. Ball and reported appropriately. So big change from what we've usually done. You'll have to give me a little more information, your name, your email, and your ISA certified arborist number, and we can get you your credential. With that, let's start talking trees. Dr. Ball, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thank you, Tony. Good introduction there. And welcome everyone for attending. For those of you that are going to be traveling today on the east end of the state, safe travels. Our university closed at 11:20, but I managed to sneak back into the building. They electronically locked them, but wanted to make sure I got this thing done here today. So I liked putting a picture from spring of 2025, but in Brookings, that's what it looks like right now. Now, this is in town, and it certainly doesn't look that bad, but I understand you start getting out of town here, and the weather deteriorates fairly quickly. But let's get into this. Now, I'm going to start with the weather, because the weather is a very much the determining factor for what's going to happen to our trees and what pests are going to be present. So weather's that overdriving force. And this is a picture at my rain gauge, which is the wall drug sign just outside of the exit 132 on I-90. And you know what? It didn't fill this spring. I can remember years where literally it was covering part of the sign itself. In other words, you couldn't read all of the wall drug sign. But that's been several years. I think 2019 might be the last. So what happened as far as weather? Well, if we take a look, this is where we were at a year ago. The entire state was under some level of drought intensity, from moderate drought to severe drought. And if we quickly go through the year, you can see that Southwest was under severe drought. Large parts of the southern part were under moderate drought conditions, and the rest of the state was abnormally dry. And notice that did not change for a while here. We started getting a little bit less in the eastern part of the state, but it was not till May that some small portions of the state were out of any level of drought intensity. Now, it did continue to improve as we go into May. You notice here parts of the northern part of the state here, the area around Pierre in the center, kind of that little area there, were now free of drought. But you'll also notice the rest of the state was mostly abnormally dry, the yellow, if you will. And then the green in there was just moderate drought, where we only had a few areas, mostly in the southwest, that were still under severe drought conditions. And notice those disappeared by July. By July, the majority of the state was actually drought free. And then a little bit of yellow for abnormally dry and moderate drought, with only one small place as severe. And that started disappearing. Here was August. And then look at September. Now, for me, what I really appreciate about this is September is really the key time for moisture for determining winter survival and winter dieback. And fortunately, most of the state, except in the southwest, was receiving adequate precipitation by then. And so I would encourage people to water their evergreens to help them get through the winter. It wasn't really as critical because by this time we were getting some pretty good rains. And so, from the standpoint of winter desiccation injury, I do not expect to see the same level of winter desiccation injury on plants this coming spring as I did a year ago. And the reason for that is last year we started fall dry and it stayed dry all winter. At this point, we had some pretty good moisture at the beginning of fall, which kind of even led into October. So the plants went into dormancy hydrated this year, and that's a real plus. Again, unless you're in the Southwest or even a little bit of the Southeast corner of the state. But notice now as we're getting to late fall in that, at least the southern half of the state was getting to drought conditions, and we're starting January a little dry as well, at least in the South. How about temperatures? Our summer, July is what we look at in terms of stress for trees. What was the average temperature in July? And you'll notice a lot of the state was either cooler than normal or maybe just a slightly warmer than normal. Not much at all. In fact, you combine the moisture received this summer with the temperatures, actually was not a bad year to be a tree in South Dakota. With a little bit of exceptions, we even had below normal temperatures in some of the western part of the state. And take a look at July here for air temperatures for Aberdeen and Sioux Falls. You'll notice that 70s, 60s were pretty much the average. Yes, indeed. We did get a few hot days. And by the way, Rapid City did as well. But notice we also got kind of a little bit cooler there. So while we did have our hit our 90s and our hundreds, it wasn't that bad. All right. But what about the weather we're seeing later this week? The forecast -19 to -25, and that's air temperature, by the way. We're not in bad shape for those. Our trees can tolerate that. If you take a look at how trees prepare for winter, the decreasing day lengths start the hardening process. Okay, because every year that's consistent. The day length goes down at a predictable, not only predictable, we can tell you what the day length's going to be on any day, even 50 years in the future. So plants use that as their first cue to start preparing for dormancy. In other words, start withdrawing water from cells and between cells and start replacing it with essentially a natural antifreeze. Well, first they're going to stop growing. That second thing where they're going, a second stage there, phase two, that's triggered by alternating hard frost and mild days. And that worked out well for us as well. We did get some good hard frosts, which it takes, and then we had warm days. The hard frost triggers that chemical change. We need the slightly warmer days above freezing so biological activities and chemical activities can occur. In other words, to continue to replace that water in cells with essentially a natural antifreeze. And it works out pretty well. Now, where should plants be? I gave you some zone 4 plants. Most of our zone 4 trees out there right now can tolerate minus 140 degrees. So when I get calls from people saying, well, it's the end of January, early February, it's going to get down to this cold, X cold. For the plants that are hardy for our area, which should be the zone 4 plants that you're putting in the yard, they can take it. Give you a good example. Bur oak and paper birch right now can tolerate minus 80 as an air temperature. I don't see any long-term forecast saying minus 65. And red osier dogwoods that you have in your yard, right now they can tolerate minus 120 degrees. I don't think we're looking at temperatures that cold. So I'm not really worried about the temperatures we're getting right now. This would be well within the norm for almost all the plants that you're planting and for all our native plants. In other words, looking at our native forests and riparian forests and such, I'm not worried at all. They can take this. Now, the other thing we can end up with is winter desiccation injuries. But again, because of the fact that a lot of plants started winter properly hydrated, and you might say, well, wait a minute, John, you just said they naturally have to dry out during the winter. Yes, but we need the water to start that chemical process. That they had adequate moisture in there. Again, the old idea, what I learned in college 50 years, more than 50 years ago, was you wanted to withhold water from the plants in the fall to help them dehydrate. Not true. We want to make sure they start the fall adequately hydrated so they can go through the chemical process of replacing that water with, again, their natural antifreeze. And so I don't expect to see a lot of this as I have the last 2 years in the spring, where the tops of maples, birch, other plants that are very sensitive to desiccation injury, we should come out of this fairly well this spring. All right. Well, what happened this last year? Let's go through that. Well, if we start out here, end of January, a lot of J-shaped larvae, EAB. EAB can tolerate minus 30 to minus 40 now. What's interesting is the parasitoids that are being released to feed on these, they can't tolerate as cold of temperatures as emerald ash borer itself. Right now, as it was a year ago, emerald ash borer is curled like a cat in the wood of the tree and essentially has done the same thing as plants. It's replaced a lot of that water with an alcohol. So think of it as they're sitting in there curled up drinking eggnog, and they're going to do that all winter. Not a bad way to spend the winter months. And so they're well prepared for the winter as well. And nor do I expect to see any winter injury from them. What else did we see? And I expect to get some more samples of this. Anyone bringing in ash firewood during the winter, this is the insect that flies out of it. This is the banded ash borer, the adults. Now, this insect's unusual in that it overwinters in the adult stage. And when it starts getting exposed to some warm temperatures, example, bringing firewood in, stacking it up next to your fireplace for, a week, they'll start emerging from it and start buzzing around your house. They can't do anything. They can't attack anything in your house. They're going to bounce off windows as they did last year because they're trying to get to the sun. They're kind of a plaything for your cats. And other than that, vacuum them up or take them and toss them outside, and that'll shock the heck out of them. But not a real problem, not a real threat. And the other thing, and this is a picture out of the first issue of the Pest Alert for 2016, or 2026, sorry. But we also saw this obviously in January of 2025, and that was deer rub. And by the way, deer love staghorn sumac. If you're trying to attract deer, a thicket of staghorn sumac will do it. It's got kind of a soft wood. The bucks love to rub on it to get the velvet off their antlers. After that, it becomes kind of a signpost, and you'll get deer revisiting it to rub. Does will come up to them as well. And that, so you find this out there, and I'm not worried about killing the sumac because they sprout from the base, but we're seeing this damage again this year, as we will every year. But last year, in January and February, squirrels gone wild. Elm trees in particular, they would, this is not porcupines, this is squirrels. They'll literally strip all the bark off, and you can tell by the little chew marks in the bark that it was squirrels. And they're stripping the bark off these trees. Why they're doing it, we're not sure. It might be after the sweet phloem tissue. They've a couple of other theories. I think they do it just to annoy us. But they can do a lot of damage on an elm tree. But if you notice an elm tree in your windbreak or in town where the bark just kind of disappears fairly quickly, that's probably squirrels. Well, come spring of last year, and we did have a nice, fairly early spring. Plums were in bloom by April. And in early April is when emerald ash borer uncurls and shrinks and looks like a tiny little larvae. And it's called a prepupy. And they're in that phase for a couple of weeks, but that was what we saw last April, and I expect to see it again this April. But the other thing that showed up last year, as frequently does, but last year was highly noticeable, is the male cones on spruce and pines, the spruce especially, because I was getting a lot of calls. What were all these growth on their spruce trees? 2025 was a great year for spruce to produce the male cones and then obviously the female cones. The male cones break down very quickly, but I was getting a lot of calls on blue spruce, white spruce, which we call Black Hill spruce, and Norway spruce from all these bumps. Now, these are the male cones which appear on the lower branches of the trees. The female cones are on the upper branches. That's a mechanism to keep you from pollinating yourself, but instead pollinating the neighboring trees. But people confuse this with, for example, spruce budscale, which is a sucking insect that's also sessile, doesn't move. Well, we had a lot of cankerworm problems up in the northwestern part of our state, spearfish area, for example. And that defoliation injury, we were wondering if it was going to occur again in 2025. And yes, we went out and counted eggs in March of 2025, and we had a lot of eggs. So in other words, there had been a lot of moths in the fall of 2025 that laid eggs, and so we were thinking we were going to get a lot of defoliation again in 2025, and we'll go into what did we see here in a moment. As spring progressed, the silver sparrows were in bloom about the end of April, and at that point, the EAB larvae, the prepupa, actually become pupae. You can see it starting to resemble what an emerald ash borer adult looks like. They're in that stage for only a few weeks. So the emergence was just about when we expected to see it, and that was right around Memorial Day. The adults were beginning to fly. But if you remember what happened the last couple of weeks of May, temperatures dropped and we got rains. Despite the fact we were still under drought conditions, what moisture we were receiving in spring occurred there. This is from Custer, South Dakota. Look at how the temperatures dropped in that same time period. They had rain and or precipitation, and some of that was snow. I took this picture latter part of May in Custer State Park. It's a beautiful picture, but it shows you kind of the snowy conditions we had there. And by the way, at the eastern of the state, so now you're looking at Huron, for example, we had the same thing happen. Temperatures dropped the latter part of May, and we ended up with a lot of moisture. Well, why am I emphasizing that? We had the perfect recipe for a lot of tree leaf diseases last year. We had cool, moist conditions at the time they were releasing spores because a lot of our diseases need to have temperatures in the 50s and 60s, and they need wet conditions so when the spore lands on the leaf, it'll germinate. So we had the perfect setup for leaf diseases last May, and I'll show you we did see them. Well, that cold snap was cold enough. We had a lot of cold injury last spring. I was getting calls in mid-May, towards the end of May, who sprayed? And nobody sprayed. What we were seeing is all these leaves that were coming out when they got hit by that frost that was occurring across the state, not on the same day, but those cold conditions kind of prevailed statewide. If you were leafing out, now if you'd leafed out completely already, your leaves had hardened and you were okay. So the basswood trees, which were the first to leaf out, their leaves were fine. And if you were a bur oak, you hadn't leafed out yet and you were fine. But a lot of maples, hickories, honey locusts were just leafing out at that May cold snap. And a lot of their leaves were damaged like this. Now they re-leafed and came out fine. But at least for that time period, we saw damage and trees that were leafing out because of the cool conditions. The leaves had a lot of anthocyanins in them. And so we were actually getting fall color in the spring. Now, it's fine. The leaves turned green as the temperatures warmed, but Freeman maples, catalpas, and a number of other trees actually came out with a red fall color. For that, the leaves that were actually emerging towards the end of May didn't harm the plants. And actually, the anthocyanins are protection from cold injury. So essentially, what the plant was doing was protecting itself from those cold snaps. And we saw an abundant seed crop on elms. Now, notice there's still snow on the ground here in this picture. This is from the hills at the latter part of May when you were getting some of those snowstorms. But even during that, what you're looking at is not leaves on that elm tree, but seeds on that elm tree. They were already beginning to produce seed right during that cold snap. Well, what else happened? In the Black Hills, people were cutting, thinning out pine trees in the winter as often as occurred, but the slash was piled in February. That's a little late. Why? Because that material can stay green enough to attract beetles, as I'll show you. Those beetles can emerge and then the piles dry. So if the environment is dry, they can also go to attack live trees then. So we don't recommend putting down fresh slash really from any time from now until spring. And guess what? It did start attracting beetles this spring. That material that was cut in February and March was green enough that the adult pine engraver beetles that literally overwinter in the duff, not in trees typically, though they can occasionally, but they're actually in the duff layer. And they start to fly when we start getting some day temperatures over 60 degrees, which we frequently do in April, of course, out there. So they were attacking the slash before that snow hit. And they were firmly in it by mid-April. All that nice green slash and the snow only helped it stay moist longer. And by about the 15th of April last year, the beetles were already making their egg galleries. In other words, they'd already mated, and you can see those little dots along the side of it. That's where mom was laying her eggs along the chambers she had made with dad. There's only one dad, three moms in the case of pine engraver beetles. And they were already set up for housekeeping by about the middle of April this last year. The larvae started hatching at the end of April, again, before that cold snap occurred, and they were not affected by it at all. Well, what else did we see? We saw pine wilt disease presenting. Now, these were trees, that one tree died the previous year, all right? But the color just intensified during the winter. And this was in April. And when we cut those trees down, you'll find they've got blue stain and they're dry as dust. There's no sap to this wood at all. And the reason why is the pine wood nematode, which causes the disease, along with the blue stain fungus, what it does is it attacks the resin ducts. And so the trees are no longer producing sappy wood. Well, the key thing there, as in this year, we're seeing it again, is you need to get out there. Any of those trees that died from pine wilt disease last fall and showed this winter, maybe even turning that bright color, and the wood and the twigs are crisp, the Sawyer beetles begin emerging in early or mid-April. The Sawyer beetle is the vector. It carries the disease. In fact, what's interesting is the pupae of the Sawyer beetle produces a chemical which also attracts the nematodes. It's almost like your flight is leaving, get on board. And then they will fly to another pine tree, one that's healthy, and even just in their egg niches or just feeding on the needles is enough to release the nematodes into a new host. So anyone that has trees that died from pine wilt, one of our recommendations is those trees need to be cut and that wood destroyed, not just cut up, because the Sawyer beetles will still come out of it, but that wood destroyed, chipped or burned or buried before April 1st. And if you don't, or when they attack another tree, you'll find the Sawyer beetles in there. It'll be a large grub-like larvae, and they really shred and reduce the wood into these kind of almost coffee ground particles. The other thing we saw in May was these gelatin horns of cedar apple rust. Doesn't really cause the problems on the cedars, the junipers, but when they start producing those, you know they're releasing the spores that are now going to go to the apples and the crab apples. So you better get your spray on that fungicide to protect the foliage. End of May, we started seeing the black locust in bloom. And what does that tell you? Emerald ash borer is also about to emerge, which they did. Emerald ash borer started flying at the end of May, early June of last year. Now, the interesting thing, the emerald ash borer adult has to feed on leaves before she lays eggs. So from emergence, the first emergence to the first egg being laid is going to be about 2 weeks. So we don't see eggs laid on the ash trees until really early June or mid-June even. And by the way, mom will lay some eggs underneath bark crevices, and then she'll fly over and eat some more leaves and then lay some more eggs. So she's going to be going back and forth between feeding on foliage and laying eggs for most of the month of June. Well, remember those eggs that I showed you on the oak trees up near Spearfish? We did get a hatch. And those fall cankerworms were going through and feeding away and just trailing. They can hang from a thread and going from tree to tree, and they were doing defoliation. What was interesting, though, is this was the third year of defoliation, and a lot of the larvae died. What often happens with these defoliators, the population shows up for about 3 years. Typically, a bacteria or viral disease gets into them because the population's high, kills a lot of them. So we weren't able to find a lot of pupae. So what does that tell us? We're not finding a lot of eggs this fall for the fall cankerworm. I'm not expecting to see a lot of larvae coming out defoliating the trees again in 2026. Will we see a few? Absolutely. But this huge defoliation that was present in northern hills, we don't expect that to continue. Why? Because we're not seeing a lot of eggs on the trees. The eggs are placed in the fall. And so this year we're probably out of it, and that's pretty typical defoliators. 2 or 3 years of a lot of defoliation, and then it fades away for maybe 5 years or so. Will we see some trees defoliated? Absolutely. That's normal. But the widespread defoliation, probably not. And by June, we were getting the second generation of pine engraver beetles, and they were still attacking the slash. The slash was moist enough that the second generation was in the down trees because they stayed moist. And you can see here's a second generation laying eggs. This was about the 11th of June that they were going through. They pupated by July 8th. Now, here's the problem. That wood was drying by then in the slash piles that were laid down in February and April. And so the adults cannot reattack that slash. They're going to have to go to trees to find any green material. Well, they were emerging, but fortunately, remember last summer then, we were showing you we're starting to get some rains. Were there a lot of rains? No. Normal precipitation in the southern hills is about 8.4 inches of precip from April, May, and June. 2025, we did start it out dry, so we got about 81% of normal. If we had less than 75, that means the trees are stressed enough that the engraver beetles will attack them. This is a picture from 2 years earlier where people put down slash in April, and from February to April, it was bone dry, and the beetles literally went from those dried out slash piles in the summer and attacked the neighboring trees. We did not see that in 2025 because the rains came, and essentially we got lucky. Well, some other weird things we saw. Remember that picture I showed you of all the elms that were covered with seeds? Well, those became gaps because everywhere there was a seed, there wasn't a leaf. So I got calls from people, why is my elm trees look so tufted? They had a lot of seeds. And by the way, I got lots of pictures and samples. What are these little weeds coming up in my garden? Those were all the elms that from that massive seed crop. Well, now we're in the summer. So we had our Japanese tree lilacs bloom as they often do in the middle of June. Beautiful sight. They're one of the last lilacs to bloom, other than late lilac. They bloom about 3 weeks after common lilac blooms. And what did we find? Two new counties with emerald ash borer. This is Millbank, and I want you to look at this picture here closely because this was the report of suspected EAB, which was followed up by one of our service foresters, who then looked at it and said, I think it's EAB, who then called me to confirm it, which is following all the proper procedures. Landowner, homeowner reported it, followed up by one of our service foresters in South Dakota Department of Ag and Natural Resources, who then said, this may be it. So I come up and either confirm it or say no. And this one we were able to confirm why we were catching adults. But I want you to look at that picture again. Those are trees that weren't infested for a year or two. That infestation up in Millbank was already about 4 to 5 years old when it was reported. So we already had a good little infestation going in Millbank at that time. The problem Millbank is going to have, and we've had meetings with them, is more than half their trees are ash. They have whole streets and cemeteries that are filled with ash. And so we're going over, well, what are their plans for the next few years to go over it? Combination of injections and removal of trees, which is what a lot of communities end up doing. And right after that, Larry there, the city forester for Watertown, found some trees and called me up and said, John, I think we have emerald ash borer. And I got up there, and sure enough, they did. Now, it was concentrated more in kind of the northeastern part of town, and it was relatively young infestation. So they have a few years to really get going on their plan, and they are going into their plan already. But now we have two new counties, Grant County and Cottington County that are under quarantine. My prediction for 2026 is we're probably going to fill those gaps. I'm surprised we haven't found it in Dual or Moody yet. My thought is it's probably there, but we cannot declare a new county quarantine until I have a life form. And by the way, I might mention that there was someone in Bon Homme County who on a extension website said, "Oh, we've had EAB down here for years." Well, obviously that got a visit from me, not to reprimand someone, but hey, show me the trees. You could have it. They turned out to be our banded ash borer, so it was not emerald ash borer, so they are not under quarantine. So always follow procedures. If you go to the South Dakota Department of Ag and Natural Resources, you can go down to their emerald ash borer website and you can report a find, and we will follow up. That's how we find new ones. But don't announce that we found it until we're able to say that, yes, indeed, it is emerald ash borer, because putting a county under quarantine is a little bit of a task, and we don't want to do that because that prohibits any wood movement out of that county until we have to. Now, look at this. Doesn't that look like emerald ash borer? It wasn't. The person who sent the picture to me was a hobby entomologist, so was smart enough to put a coin next to it, and it was way too small to be emerald ash borer. But it's got the it's got the color, it's got everything. It's an Agralis cane borer, and we've got a number of those species in South Dakota. And the person found the adult. The adult landed on it, and he collected it. But he did everything right. He sent me a picture, and I had one of our service foresters out in the hills, John, or excuse me, Josh, go up there and collect it and send it to me. But it looks like a baby EAB, and there is no such thing. When you're adult, you're an adult. You have the normal size. What else were we finding this summer? Ash lilac borer. Now, ash lilac borer will attack lilacs. In fact, it's primary host, but will attack ash as well. But it has legs, and we don't have legs on emerald ash borer. Emerald ash borer was feeding away this summer. There's their serpentine galleries going winding back and forth. By summer, they're an in third, what we call an in third star larvae. They have kind of those bell-shaped segments, particularly towards the end. They're happily feeding away in the phloem tissue of their hosts. Usually takes them several years to kill their hosts. So again, once we find dying trees, you know the infestation has probably been there for possibly 5 years. We also saw carpenter worms. There's the larvae, and it actually is burrowing into the tree. And if you find an ash with these big holes in it towards the center, that's our native carpenter worm. So we have a lot of insects that'll feed on ash other than emerald ash borer, and we saw them all last summer. Well, back to those pines. There's the pine sawyer larvae. It gets the name Sawyer beetle because the adult with those big mandibles makes a chomping sound. You can even hear it if you're out in the forest and it's quiet. And they were feeding away this summer, shredding up the trees. You can find them in trees that do have pine wilt in them, but the disease is actually caused by the nematode, not the Sawyer beetle. Sawyer beetle just carts them. Well, remember back to that wet May we had? Cool, moist May. I shouldn't say wet, but it was moist. Boy, did we see the fungal diseases this last summer. There's seed or apple rust on apple. That's the top of the leaf. That's the underside of the leaf. Now it's producing spores to go back to the cedars. And we saw cedar hawthorn rust, and that was popping up, and they're producing spores that are going back to the cedars in the summertime. And we saw ash rust. Again, why did we see a lot of these diseases, including apple scab? We had moisture at just the right, moist, cool conditions right at the perfect time for these diseases to present. And even cottonwood rust. The big question I was getting from people, what do I spray? Well, nothing now. The spray would have had to go on in the spring, okay, to protect the foliage from the spores, germinating spores. In other words, they'll kill the spores as they land before they germinate. Once the spores germinate, we're out of luck. Horses left the barn. There's not a lot you can do. We had a good plum crop this year in July, but we also had a good crop of plum pockets. This is a disease that affects plum trees, a lot of our ornamental plums, even our wild plums. And what the disease does is it never develops the stone. So these are hollow inside, and the rest of the flush in that goes to this real spongy, yicky disease. And we call it plum pockets. Again, though, people say, what can I do? Not a lot. You can spray in the spring as the buds are opening. But again, if you miss that spray window, it's too late. So most of our fungicide sprays have to be applied in the spring, a lot sooner than you're going to see the symptoms of the diseases. And the disease we saw everywhere was this leaf blight on lilacs. Call after call. And by the way, North Dakota saw the same thing, same with Nebraska. We had the wet conditions were just right for the spores to germinate. And by midsummer, many of the, I shouldn't say all, but many of the lilacs were already having discolored leaves and they were dropping them. And then by August, they were completely defoliated in some cases. But I tell people, look at the buds. Are the buds plump and good? Yeah, you're fine then. Those plants will leaf out just fine come spring. Will we see the disease again this spring? I don't know. They're not like insects where you have a couple of years of them showing up, the defoliators, and then they disappear for a while. Leaf diseases really depend on what's going to occur in May. Are we going to have cool, moist conditions? So if we have a dry May, you won't see the disease. If we have a moist, doesn't have to be excessively wet, but a moist, cool May, it's a perfect recipe for leaf diseases. So our fungicide sprays are really protectants. You're putting them on anticipating that the conditions are going to cause the disease. Once the disease gets established in the plant, it's too late for many of our fungicides to be of any value. Oh, and by the way, the conditions we had last September, we actually had lilacs in bloom. It was crazy. We had lilacs that were defoliated, but in flower. Does this hurt the plant to produce flowers in the fall? Absolutely not. But every bloom you saw in a lilac last fall is one less bloom you'll see this spring. That's all. And because we were out of drought and that, we did see some sucking insect problems out there. This is oak bug. We also saw aphids in that. Again, it was actually a pretty good year for trees. Nice, cool, relatively moderate summer temperatures. Perfect for a lot of our sucking insects as well. Well, we did have some bad weather though. We had straight line winds, maybe a tornado, I guess, in the Hudson area. It was fairly small area, but if you lived in it, lots of trees were down. Those slash piles that I showed you from February, the February slash piles in August were completely dry. They were not a host for the uh, engraver beetles anymore. But fortunately, conditions were wet enough, moist enough that they weren't going to the live tree standing nearby. They were just dispersing, feeding on any small recent snags or brush that came down. But the moisture, we saw bur oak blight in northeastern South Dakota. For that disease to really present, we need moist conditions in summer. And we were getting trees that were defoliating from bur oak blight. Now, this disease is really most often occurring on this one variety of bur oak, the bur oak that produces a small seed. That bur oak, that's its native range. If you're west of 281, you are not seeing bur oak blight, which we call Bob. The defoliation is west of there is due to anthracnose, typically. But if you're in those counties that kind of border the edge of the state, that's where that subspecies occurs. So what does this mean? If you're going to the conservation district and buying bur oak and you're planting them out in windbreaks, they're probably not going to get the disease. If you're looking at native stands of bur oak in these counties and they're defoliated, that's probably bur oak blight. Now, there is a treatment for bur oak blight. There are people in the Minnehaha County area, those woody draws that occur around Sioux Falls, that are treating their trees. Our recommendation is you only treat trees that have presented symptoms of the disease, that have the disease, and we do culture for that here in the lab at SDSU. Connie on it on the session today. She is the person that kind of leads that. But we just don't recommend going out and injecting the oaks in your yard just because they might get it. If you have a native bur oak and you're in one of those counties that's in color and you've seen these symptoms and we find that it is the disease, those are the trees you would treat. Mountain pine beetle popped up. You're probably hearing about it. More hearing about it than seeing it. Unless you're up in the northern part of the hills, Cheyenne Crossing, Savoy, up to Spearfish, that's where we're seeing the disease showing up. Spearfish Canyon, there are pockets that are appearing. And when we've gone out and looked at it in the fall, yes, we are finding some pockets that are as large as 25, 50, occasional 75 trees. And if that's on your property, you are calling it an epidemic. I understand that, but it's not. Hills wide, we're not seeing it. In fact, we're still seeing those pockets dispersing the following year rather than expanding. So we're monitoring it. We will have a workshop in the Northern Hills coming up here probably in about a month. It will be advertised for landowners to come and talk about mountain pine beetle management, what they can do this spring. If you're up in the Northern Hills and you have valuable pines next to your home, we are recommending that you have those trees treated by April. That will protect them from mountain pine beetle, which actually flies later on in the summer, but it'll also protect them from ips that we may see this spring. So what happened this fall? Well, we had good fall color. We did see a lot of Scots pines turning color again and Austrian pines, as you see in this picture. Those trees need to be removed by April 1, so we're not spreading the disease to nearby trees. And guess what? We're still not seeing the disease up in North Dakota. Why? You need to have a mean July temperature, typically in the low 70s during July, in order for the disease to present. So the disease moved gradually north and South Dakota as our summers have warmed. I expect we'll see it in North Dakota. It might even happen this year. It's getting warmer. We see decay fungi in the fall, as we always do, but we had that December windstorm. Now, that December windstorm put a lot of slash on the ground, a lot of broken branches and that. It's early enough that that may dry out, especially how dry it is in the hills right now, before they're attractive to the graver beetles. Remember, the graver beetles are going to attack that slash probably sometime in March. Depends on the weather again. But just as a precaution, if you got any of this slash, that should be lopped and scattered. Please don't pile it if you can. Burn it if possible, but of course it's been dry, so you may not be able to. And again, if you have valuable pines next to your home, particularly if you're in the northern hills, those trees should be treated. Hire a commercial applicator with the equipment to get a spray up 65 feet or so and get on the schedule to have those trees treated fairly early. A lot of those companies will be out in March spraying trees, protect them from the pine and graver beetles that'll be coming out. And also that same treatment, that same spray will protect them from mountain pine beetle later on this summer. And what else did we see? We saw a lot of busted up trees. So there's still a lot of cleanup going on in the Rapid City to Custer area. The big question I get, can I save that tree? Actually, no. The half that's still standing needs to be removed as well. And the finish up of this, ginkgo fruit. I had a ginkgo tree with this is the picture of the fruit. It smells. It smells bad, but it's been cool enough they didn't notice except for those couple of those warm days. But it was what we call a rootstock escape. They had a ginkgo tree that was supposed to be a male, but the male died in production standpoint, and the female stem came up. And so they're getting a female ginkgo with fruit, and there's a male ginkgo just down the street. So all I'm telling them is get used to raking this up or get used to your neighbors thinking someone's septic tank has popped because they are a little bit smelly. But ginkgo fruit is edible. They make a soup out of it. It's kind of an acquired taste, kind of like lutefisk for us. But in Asia, they do harvest the fruit, maybe with a nose plug on. Finally, and you're going to say, why am I even putting this on? When I started preparing this presentation, we were still getting that warm weather. So I was getting questions from people, should I be watering my trees? Clearly not today. But during the winter, particularly out in the hills or the very southeast of our state, if we get some warm weather, temperatures in the 40s and 50s, and you certainly had those, and if we have soil temperatures above freezing, notice here a lot of areas were below freezing, but you get up northern hills, we had temperatures of 33 degrees still. Some winter watering is beneficial. You want to water early in the day when the air temperatures are warm enough that that water can move up, and it's only going to move up in smaller trees. Larger trees, that wood could still be hard enough that it's not going to pull it up. And you don't want to water any more than the water is being absorbed by the end of the day. So be aware of that. I'm sure we may get into some of those days that we need to water, but certainly not right now, unless we're not getting those cold conditions out in the hills right now. So with that, thank you for attending. We should have time for questions. I always turn that over to Tony. But thanks. There's how I can be reached. That's my cell number. That's the way most people get a hold of me now is hey, I've got this picture, and they text it to me. And you can get a fairly fast response or email to me at this. And I'm going to stop sharing. Actually, I'll leave that picture on. What the heck? Tony, do we have any questions for this one? There's not a lot of treatments you're doing at this time of year, so I don't anticipate a lot of questions.
I
But
don't.
perhaps we have. Okay.
I
All
don't
right.
have any questions in the chat right now, Dr. Ball. We'll give folks maybe another moment or two to
Sure.
put any burning questions in. Thank you very much. I will just make one more call for any Society of American Forester certified foresters. If you want to provide your credentials for a CEU, please do so. And also, just another reminder for any ISA certified arborists, if you are seeking that CEU, please put your name, your email, and your certified arborist number in
Whoops.
chat box. We have about 40 of you who have done so already. Thank you so much for joining us. Master Gardeners, thank you also for joining us. I don't have any credential information for you, but we always love having you on our calls every month. I do have a question here, Dr. Ball, from
Okay.
Debbie, asking anything to take care of or to prevent oak galls.
Wish we could. Oak galls are an issue for two reasons. One is they're not attractive. People don't like to see the galls on them. The other problem, we do have a snippet wasp that the woodpeckers will actually shred the bark on a young oak tree trying to get them. In fact, Aaron Keyes, city forester up in Aberdeen's so frustrated. He says, I don't even want to plant oaks anymore because a lot of his young oaks have been attacked by that. There's not a lot that can be done in terms of sprays. but it is labeled for it, and we've had some success with injecting or as a pour around at the base of the tree. I'll give credit. Warren Chemical provided us with the chemical. That's it. They did not say what results, but Aaron Keys and I went out and did that one spring or one summer, and it was fairly successful. And it is labeled for that, so you might have to hire someone to do it. But as a soil drench around the base of the tree, and it was a pour around that we did, we were able to get the chemical up and kill the larvae, so we had fewer gulls that year. So there is a way of doing this, and we'll have the instructions later on, but not a spray.
And
And it's
Dave,
midsummer too, by the way.
Dave is curious, these oak galls, can they be physically removed without damaging the tree? Is that something we can do?
Do you like kind of pulling marbles off? But you can do it. But you also want to note that a lot of them don't have anybody in them right now. Okay, they've already left. You'll find a hole in the gall. And I should mention that if you do collect those galls right now in the winter, you can make oak gall ink. And if anyone wants the instructions, just text me or email me because I do have them. And as a trivia point, the U.S. Constitution was written in oak gall ink. So oak gall ink was very common. You collect the galls, you put them in water. It's fairly easy to do. Kids like to do it. You go to Hobby Lobby, get a little thickener, add that to it. And if you want to collect the galls, they're empty right now. But if you want to use it to actually go out and write something, it's pretty easy to make ink out of it.
Well, Linda is curious, with Turner County being in our EAB quarantine, she's curious what is the procedure for getting any sort of attention for EAB on their property? What are the steps other than calling you, or I'd recommend maybe uh, John Hartland there in Sioux Falls to go out and take a look first. Any other
Yeah.
recommendations?
Now, again, what the quarantine means is you cannot move any hardwood firewood out of the county. Now, you can move it back and forth to other quarantine counties. So, in other words, if you said, well, I've got wood, can I move it to Minnehaha? Yes, you can go back and forth, but you cannot move it further west, for example. We don't want to move it out of quarantine areas. The reason for the quarantine is that means we have an infestation established in that county, but it does not mean the entire county is infested yet. We have areas of Minnehaha County, you get up north of Garrison and that, there's areas we still have not found EAB in. And in Union County, yes, we can find it north of Beechford, but still not in the town itself. So yeah, if you're worried about your trees, you can either contact me or contact John Hartland. He can come out and look as well. But here's the thing: if it's an ash tree you like, you don't need us to come out. You should be starting treatments because if you don't have it in your tree yet, you'll probably see it showing up here in the next year or so. So one of the other bits of advice we have for people that live in the quarantine county, well, would you come out and look at my tree and see if we need to treat it yet? The answer to that is easy. Yes, treat it now. Because the first year or two of infestations, you can't even tell. So that would be my answer for Turner County, since you're under the quarantine and have been so since 18. But again, if you'd like someone to stop and take a look at your tree and give you some idea of what you can do with it, we are happy to do that in the South Dakota Department of Ag Natural Resources.
Perfect. And that gets us to 1 o'clock Mountain Time, 2 o'clock Central there. So thank you everybody for joining us again. We'll be off next month. We're going to let the trees be dormant. Hopefully, we get some snow and some good moisture across the state. We'll be back in March, planning for late March. So about 2 months from now, we're going to talk about planting, how we can get ready for the planting season. So thank you all again for joining us. I'll stay on for a couple more moments in case there are any last ISA or SAF credentials to be added. But thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you soon.
And drive safe, everybody, if you're heading out on the roads today.